Our scripture reading this morning comes from Luke chapter 21, verses 5 through 19. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the day will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and 'the time is near.' Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues. And there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. For I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of the scriptures. Well, pretty much for the whole month of November, the lectionary passages have been picked to make us think about the end times and the second coming of Christ. As I shared last week, I am not sure that we have the correct expectations for Christ's second coming. We envision that everyone in the world will simultaneously see this historic event of Christ riding on a cloud returning to earth. Of course, the religious experts have been wrong before. They didn't recognize Jesus as the Messiah because they were expecting a Messiah who could come as a conquering hero. They missed God's clues that the Messiah would come as a suffering servant and a conquering hero. These two portrayals of the Messiah are both correct. And the only way for this to happen was for the way that it has happened and the way that it will happen. The Messiah had to come first as a suffering servant. It wouldn't make much sense for him to come as a conquering hero and then have to suffer. If he conquered once and for all, then where would the suffering come from? No, he had to come first as a suffering servant, then come a second time as a conquering hero. Now, here's where I think our religious leaders have gotten it wrong. They expect this second coming to be a moment in history where everyone will see Jesus coming on the clouds. But I think it is an individual thing, like I indicated last week. Jesus comes to us individually as our conquering hero in the time where we're facing that transition from this life to the next. He wins the battle over sin and death for us and escorts us into the presence of our Creator. As I said last week, I partly base this on testimony of people who have been pronounced dead only to come back to life again in this world. Especially the children, because they report having seen Jesus before they die too. Anyway, they all talk about Jesus escorting them to heaven, where before they see God, they are sent back. Anyway, I really didn't want to get into a discussion on the end times today, even though Jesus gives us some insight into that passage, in this passage. Instead, I want to focus on verses 19 through 21. I'm sorry, verses 12 through 19. In the first half of our Luke passage, Jesus warns us that there will be false prophets who claim to be the Messiah and or tell us that the time is near. But Jesus warns us not to pay attention to them. Then he predicts wars, earthquakes, famines, plagues, and great signs from heaven. All of those happen pretty regularly, except maybe the great signs from heaven, which I'm not sure what he's referring to when he says that. Sunspots maybe, or maybe the aurora borealis that we've experienced here recently, or the comet 3I/Atlas, which we have detected radio signals coming from, or meteor showers, or who knows. Maybe I'm making it out to be too cosmic of an experience, and he's really referring to things like hurricanes or severe storms. But in verse 12, Jesus tells his disciples, "But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name." Jesus could read the handwriting on the wall. He knew that if the authorities were going to torture him and crucify him on a cross, that they would not treat his followers with any sympathy. As it turns out, 11 of Jesus' disciples, plus Paul, died a martyr's death. Peter and Paul were martyred in 66 AD during the persecutions of Emperor Nero. Andrew went to Russia and Asia Minor, which is Greece, Syria, and Turkey. He is reported to have been crucified at Patre in Achaia. Matthias was the apostle chosen to replace Judas Iscariot. According to tradition, he went to Syria with Andrew and was put to death by burning. Thomas spread the word as far as India and China. He supposedly died in India when 4 soldiers stabbed him with their spears. Philip spread the news to North Africa and Asia Minor, where he converted the wife of a Roman proconsul. In retaliation, the proconsul had Philip arrested and cruelly put to death. Matthew, the tax collector, ministered in Persia and Ethiopia, where he was martyred, stabbed to death. There are various accounts of how Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, met his death as a martyr of the gospel. James Alphaeus ministered in Syria. The Jewish historian Josephus reported that he was stoned and then clubbed to death. James, the son of Zebedee, was put to death by Herod Agrippa shortly before the day of the Passover in year 44. Now, most of these deaths are according to tradition, but this one is actually recorded in the Bible in Acts 12, verses 1 through 2. Simon the Zealot ministered in Persia and was killed for refusing to sacrifice to the sun god. And according to tradition, Jude, who is also known as Thaddeus, taught in Armenia, Syria, and Persia, where he was martyred. Tradition tells us that he was buried in Kalisa in what is now Iran. John was the only one of the original 12 disciples who did not meet a violent death. He lived out his full natural life, although he was arrested and exiled to the island of Patmos. These are the people who walked with Jesus for 3 years. Just knowing him gave them the motivation and courage to carry on his work, to spread the good news, even in the face of persecution and death. It seems to me that if we're not willing to go to those extremes for the sake of Jesus, then maybe we really don't know Jesus. And I know we live in a world that was different from what they lived in. We live in a world where Christianity is the norm, although there are still places in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia where Christians are being martyred for their beliefs. But for those disciples, Christianity was a revolutionary concept that threatened the status quo and threatened those who held positions of power. I'm not saying that we need to seek out martyrdom or that we need to sacrifice our lives in order to be Christian. Some are called to make sacrifices and some aren't, as the following story points out. A pilot, a boy, the world's smartest man, and an old man were on a plane. Suddenly, the plane developed engine failure, and the pilot said, "We have to jump. There are only 3 parachutes on the plane, so you guys had better decide who's going to have to sacrifice themselves." He took one of the parachutes and jumped. The world's smartest man said, "I'm way too important to die. I have to get a parachute." Then he took one and jumped. At that point, there was only one parachute left. The old man turned to the boy and said, "You take the last parachute, kid. You've got your whole life to live, and I'm going to die soon anyways." But the boy smiled, held up 2 parachutes, and said, "It's okay. There are 2 of them left because the world's smartest man took my backpack." Yes, that's a joke. But it points out that we need to be ready to make a sacrifice like the old man, even if we're not required to. Cassie was a 17-year-old junior at her high school in Colorado. She was a beautiful girl with a bright smile. Cassie was also a dedicated Christian, active in youth group at West Bowles Community Church. She liked to study in the library during her lunch hour. She was a writer and loved poetry. On April 20th, 1999, a fellow student pointed a gun at her face and asked her if she believed in God. She said yes. With that, the student shot and killed Cassie. The place was Columbine High School. Cassie had the courage, even in the face of death, to testify to her schoolmate. Her life was short. It ended tragically, yet even in death, she witnessed to more than 2,500 people who attended her funeral. Cassie's pastor, the Reverend George Kirsten, commented, This is a graduation ceremony for Cassie." He had performed the marriage for Cassie's parents 19 years earlier. He went on to say, "Cassie went to a martyr's death, and we're going to celebrate that because she's in the Martyrs Hall of Fame." 2 days before she died, Cassie had a part in a church video where teens spoke up about their faith. She said, "I just try not to contradict myself, to get rid of all hypocrisy and just live for Christ." If a gunman pointed a gun at us, would we have a strong enough belief to say that we believed in God? Jesus warned his followers that they would be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and that some of them would be put to death. There is a cost to discipleship. Are we willing to make the sacrifice to call ourselves Christians? That sacrifice may not require us to forfeit our lives. It may be something much smaller, a decision that happens in the course of our everyday lives, such as things as being true to our spouse, or true to our word, or acting ethically, or following Jesus' teachings. When another church member offends us, are we willing to forgive, or are we, or at least discuss the issue in a civilized manner so that Christ may be glorified? Are we willing to deny ourselves pleasures, money, and honor in this life in order to preserve the name and reputation of Christ and those who have been willingly given their lives for the sake of the gospel? And that is what it means to call ourselves Christians. And yet many who call themselves Christians have trampled on the name of Christ because they prioritized indulging in selfish desires over serving the best interests of the church. May we be a community of believers who think Christ first when we make our decisions on how to act. Amen.